Nick, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. The place in the Biosphere Project was hosted by SUP. It's a Great Place scheme project run by the National Heritage Lottery Fund. And it involved 9 communities spread across 3 contrasting landscape character areas. So there was the Stincher Valley in southern Ayrshire, which had 5 communities, the Wigtonshire Moors with 3 communities, and the Lonely Borg Peninsula with just 1 community. It asked those 9 communities to be curious about where they lived and to share their experiences with others. So it's all about telling a story. It's about communities telling a story about their place, about strengthening a shared identity and making connections. And as part of this talk or presentation, I'm going to cover the themes that we covered with those 9 communities, some of the challenges that we faced, and also the achievements that we managed to get. So one of the, I suppose, easiest ways of sharing and getting communities working together and making connections is through positive practical action. And this here you can see is the Borg community at Castle Haven. Castle Haven is an Iron Age dun, or similar to a broch. It's hidden away on the coast and many people don't know about it. And it was identified as somewhere that we could do more to highlight it. And this group here, which involved also making connections with a neighbouring community. So volunteers from Gatehouse of Fleet also came along and cleared the vegetation from this ancient monument. Part of the process that we needed to work with the community was getting consent. So not only from the landowner, but also HES because it was a scheduled monument, and also from Nature Scott because it was an SSSI. And all of these things helped people understand what was there to protect their area, but also how they could work and manage and maintain a very special place. And it wasn't just practical action, it moved on and did a lot more as well, but I'll mention that later on. Practical action was also carried out at Glen Luce at Balcale Glen, an ancient woodland, one that the community have taken over, and there was a small group of friends of Balcale Glen who were itching to get in there and do some management work. This was something that actually took quite a long time to get going. It wasn't really until fairly recently that the friends got going in the glen, mostly removing laurel and rhododendron. But it also provided an opportunity to make other connections, in particular with the primary schools. So on 2 of the work days, the primary school came down and helped with the removal of the laurel, and also did some work on imagining how the cleared space could be used by the school. And also Galloway Fisheries Trust came along and did an electro-fishing for the primary school as well, so they could see what was in their burn, and were surprised by the amount of fish that they could see in a fairly small burn there. Photographs were also really useful throughout the project in helping people look at their history and look at their past. At Cacowan, which was another of the communities, this one in the Wigtonshire Moors, they had started the project by looking at their history. They had a local history event and a walk and a talk. But when COVID came along, that all came to a halt and we had to find a new way of getting people engaged. And the way we did that, they just had a fantastic resource of old photographs. And we put out a call for people to submit their old photographs, but also to tell us some information and history behind them. And using that, we created these panels and street exhibitions. So these panels were put up in people's in shop windows, in windows of empty buildings, and also in this case in the pub window. And with that was provided some information explaining what you could see in the picture, but also a little bit about what that told us about the community. That went on to the next step where we chose half a dozen of the images and did a an example of past and present. So we took the old image and then tried to get an identical image today, so that people could contrast and compare. And those we were able then to look at the past and see how some things had changed enormously and other ones had almost changed not at all. So here's just one of we managed to organize a tractor to take the place of a steamroller there, and using the power of Facebook and things, we were also able to find more information. So not only were we able to discover, who the Taylors were and their relatives got involved, but also in speaking to other people, we found out about other people that lived in that house. But also we were contacted by some steamroller enthusiasts who could pinpoint exactly where the steamroller came from, when it was used in the Maccas, and which model it was. So we could pinpoint exactly the date of this photograph by the steamroller, which was just amazing. And photographs became a sort of a theme for other communities as well, because it's such a good way of bringing people together to talk and share about their experiences. Another particularly successful project was in Borg, and was the field name project. So in Borg, the way the project worked actually across the way was that we involved experts to come along and give a bit of a talk about the area. And in this case, there was a talk by Ted Cowan and Mike Ansell in Borg, and that inspired one person in particular who was interested in her surroundings. Rachel wanted to record field names, and together they got a really good team of people who worked on gathering field names, mapping them, analyzing them, and then presenting them on a website. So they overall, I think they gathered well over 1,000 names, field names, of about 850 fields. So some fields had more than one name, and that information has grown arms and legs. The project. I have to say, it was initially they thought it would take about 6 months, and 2 years down the line, they're still gathering names, and the project's growing, is spreading now over to the Kakubri side, and it's really doing very well indeed. One of the things that we did was, as well as producing a web page where you could search all the field names and use a map, but we also used other media as well. So it's featured in local magazines and newspapers. It's had national reach as well, farming magazines and the like. We had an exhibition at the Gatehouse in the middle of the Fleet, which was extremely popular, and that has been turned into now a booklet as well that's available about the exhibition. And I think it's even recently appeared on TV. So it's captured the imagination, and it's really been done by, I suppose, the skills and the enthusiasm of a committed group of volunteers, which included some people gathering the information. There was Anne, who did the artist work, the painting that you just saw there. Then there was the IT side, but also we were able to bring in volunteer experts who could analyze each of the names. Another of the projects was really about geology. One of the communities in the Stincher Valley, Pinwerry, actually were really quite interested in their landform, the landscape, and the rocks beneath their feet. And I suppose further down the valley, the Ballantrae complex was something that was quite difficult to explain, and we used geology as a way of telling people about their landscape and the way that it's changed, and the amazing rocks that were beneath their feet, and the story of Scotland, which it can be told by the rocks that are there. It's just a wide variety of rocks, and something that people don't really understand very well. We produced a fabulous film all about the geology, but tied that in also with the hills and the hill forts. So it's bringing in cultural history with the rocks beneath our feet as well. We also ran a pebble event on the beach at Ballantrae. So although rocks can be quite difficult to explain, and sometimes the places where the best outcrops can be seen are quite difficult to get to and take people to, but when you have pebbles on the beach that you can tell a story of each pebble and where they've come from and what they mean, then that opens up a whole new audience to geology and the stories of rock. Cake is always a good draw for communities, but in this case, this is another project in the Stincher Valley, and it's an example of where things don't always run smoothly. So the community identified Hugh Kennedy as a character from history, a fascinating character, who built Stincher Castle, which is the ruins overlooking the river in Ballantrae. And the idea was that by using a reenactment, we would tell the story of Hugh Kennedy in film. But as the project developed, it became obvious that the script writer and the actor had one vision and the community a slightly different one, and our budget was never going to reach what they really wanted to do. So we had to rethink that a wee bit. This is actually a talk that took place in Colmanel, all about Hugh Kennedy, which was very well received, and the reenactor told the story fantastically and showed examples of armor and things like that, and really is a story that you should find out about. Hugh Kennedy ended up being a captain for Joan of Arc but before that he was a monk, and then he came back and built the castle. It's a great story, but just not one that we could tell in film. But what we were able to do was do a VR reconstruction of the castle, and that's available online. But also we've redone the panels at the base of the castle, so people can use a QR code to actually see what the castle looked like from various viewpoints and explore it and learn a little bit more about the history. We also used the same person, Callum, also did a reconstruction of the Castle Haven in Borg as well. So this was a way that people, different communities were able to share different way or the same ways to look at different places. Rivers were a theme that most communities came up with, and in fact I think eight of the communities all saw that the river was really important to their community, the story of their community. Often it was the reason that their community was there, either because it was a crossing place or a place for defending or power for later industry, those kind of things. I think only Borg was lacking a real river, and the Stincher Valley in particular, the river was core to the way that they see their communities, but also the valley, and it tied all of those communities together, so they were able to work together on a theme. And the way that we did that again was to create a film of Source to Sea, where we looked at the river and followed it on its way down and described what happened. A really nice film, again available online. And one of the projects that we did there, we had a very talented intern, Katie Ewing, who some of you might know. She worked on the project asking the community to submit written work and pulled all of that together so that the community had a poetry pamphlet that was the river in their own words. And it was very well received and was a really nice way of getting to people's feelings about the river and what it meant for them. Place names was another topic that came up frequently, and it was quite an interesting way that different communities looked at their place names. In Pinwerry, the community had produced these panels quite a number of years ago, about 10 years ago, I think. And one of the things that was covered in those panels were the meanings of place names. But interestingly, they'd used a book from, I think, the 1930s called the Carrick Galavidian, which has been described by the Scottish Place Name Society as the worst place name book ever published. The author had some very strange ideas. He wanted to find a Gaelic meaning behind almost every name, but also had particular interests or dislikes, so avoided some very obvious place name descriptions. And really the book, because it's there, and I suppose in the past, you know, if it's written in a book, then it must be true. It's been repeated, and those names have been again repeated and repeated so that they now appear in other publications and on websites and things. So once we started looking at the old panels that were looking a little bit tired, we began to realize that we needed to revisit those names and their meanings and look into the history a little bit more. And that's what we did. We revamped those panels, looking at the place names and explaining to people about their history and the area around them. The power of the internet also meant that we could discover other little glitches that were in the old panel. So for example, this panel was a particular headache for me. There was used a picture that had the cartoon characters, the brooms, appeared on. So the graphic designer who was doing the new panel said, were we sure that we had copyright permissions to use the broom characters? And then once we started looking at it, it made a connection between the Runaway Train song and an event in the Pinwerry. And it became obvious that the two were not connected at all. It was all made up, but it was based on fact, because there is actually a song all about a runaway train in Pinwerry. And once we found the history books and the song, we were able to rewrite and re-explain why that was, and create a new image as well, which wouldn't upset anyone. Guided walks is another really good way of people explaining to each other and telling each other about their area. And by involving experts who could help us, this brought people together. This was an event, actually, should say that the project started, I joined the project about halfway through, and some excellent work had been done before I started. This picture here shows Ted Cowan on a train journey. So the community from, I think it was Bar Hill mostly, but some of the other communities around did a sort of a tour and looked at covenanting, and had a train journey and a bus journey back. It was one of those things that, you know, there were some opportunities that were missed. And I think the covenanting one was one that I've always found quite difficult. I suppose it's all about the persecution of religious fanatics, and it's something that's quite difficult to explain. But also when COVID came along, we lost momentum on that theme, and it never came to fruition. But there are lots of really great stories that can be told about covenanters and what it means to the different communities in the area. And one of the things that we did was produce a blog and a series of stories about covenanters and their links with different communities. So for example, we did a series about covenanters that were banished and then returned to Scotland, and what they did when they returned to both, I think, to Borg, Bar and to Cacowan. And some people were a particular inspiration to quite a lot of the projects. So here we see Michael Ansell leading a walk in New Luce, and people were interested in their place names and about making people more aware about their really rich historical and archaeological surroundings. But again, COVID came along and it all sort of ground to a halt. But I'm glad to say that although the project has come to an end, the local people are still looking into their areas and have actually joined into the field name project now and are gathering field names and farm names and submitting them to Michael Ansell, who is analysing them, and they're now being put on the website as well. So sometimes the project has taken a long time to evolve, but eventually something has sparked and it's moved on. So what we learned from the project, I mean, this isn't new to anyone here, but I suppose the intention was really for communities to identify what they wanted to learn more about and to share with others, and that really takes time. And this project was just a 2-year project. It was extended because of COVID, and I think it's really benefited from that fact that you just need time to build trust, not only between project workers and the community, but also between the project worker and the funder. It's just so that everyone knows what's going to happen and how to do it. And that is helped by a strong framework that really provides the confidence for all concerned to know where we're starting and where we're ending up. But there is a certain amount of flexibility that's just essential in these projects. And one of the things that I think baffled me to begin with, but became clear that although you might have a start and an end, it really isn't a linear journey when you're working with communities. It can go all over the place, and it's trying to herd that and work out how that would best work. And particularly when you're working with 9 communities and your project says that you're going to start here and you've got 3 stages and you end here, and they're all working on different topics at different speeds with different skills, then these things are things that you just have to let evolve and then pick out the best bits and get there in the end. The picture behind here is one of those pictures. This is the old mill at Cowan, and it's got the old picture and the existing building in ruins superimposed. So I'm going to risk now trying to do a live film showing. This is a very short film. This was produced at the end really, and used people who'd been involved in the projects in places that mattered to them to try and explain what's important about Southwest Scotland. So fingers crossed, and we'll have a 2-minute film now happening.
People who do not know us think Scotland is fine whisky, a tartan swirl, a sprig of heather. Of course, we are all those things, but we are also so much more. We are the people who value the soils beneath our feet, stones that enclose our farmland, moved by early peoples who were here before us and remain, so our ancestors are never forgotten. We are the people who value the evolving countryside, cherish the passing seasons, inspired by dynamic skies and ever-changing weather. We are the people who embrace the life-giving rain, enriching the countryside, waters rushing from the uplands and swelling our tranquil rivers. We are the people who appreciate the small things that add up to a whole. Lush mosses in ancient woodlands and curious insects drawn to wild flowers. We are the people who welcome young and old, who have passion for place, care about our culture and nature, and collaborate for a positive future in southwest Scotland. Galloway and Southern Ayrshire UNESCO Biosphere, living in a way that benefits people and nature.
So it's all about telling the story, and we've rushed through there the themes of the place in the biosphere communities. There were others, and all of this has been summarized in a booklet, which I'm hoping will provide inspiration for other communities and development workers and help them take a closer look at their place. So that booklet is available. I was hoping this was going to be in real life so I could then hand out this booklet, but we'll certainly work out ways of getting it to you, and I'll also put it on the place in the biosphere page on the Biosphere website so that people can see it there. That's me. If people have got questions, then I'm happy to answer them.